Today we are going to go to some senior React interview questions. These questions cover many topics about React, about the depth. Feel free to showcase your software engineering skills. First question, senior level question. What are the two rules of hooks in React?
Okay, so two rules of hooks in React are number one, you should always use hooks at the top of your component and avoid using them inside while or for loops that will probably trigger any unexpected behaviors which you don't want. And the number two is you should only call hooks either inside custom hooks or inside your React component. You should never call them inside a JavaScript pure function.
Second question is, can you explain how React Lazy and Suspense work under the hood, and what are some pros and cons of using those implementations?
Basically, React Lazy allows you to lazy load a component, and under the hood, it extracts Webpack to separate that code into a bundle, and it will tag that bundle with dynamic import, and that means Webpack will only request that bundle when it's actually being used rather than on the initial load. And we need to wrap it in suspense because suspense need to show a fallback while we load that component. And when it comes to disadvantages, you gotta be careful. I saw people using left and right, but adding more requests to your critical rendering path, it's a performance anti-pattern. So you really want to lazy load the things that are not needed in the initial load. And I have seen a lot of people abusing this and end up lazy loading components that shouldn't be there in the initial loading, and that messes up and even worse performance rather than improving it. And the other thing is you've got to be careful with server-side rendering, um, because there, as far as I know, React Lazy is still not compatible with server-side rendering.
Okay, what would be
Yeah.
a use case, the perfect use case for React Lazy and Suspense to work together?
The perfect use case, it's when you have, for example, you wanna do router-based splitting, when you basically lazy loading to your different React router paths. And so if I'm on the home page and I do not load all the JavaScript components needed to load maybe the user page or about us page, so you basically split your code based on different paths.
A very specific React question. Why do we need the key attribute when rendering an array or list in React?
Okay, cool. So it's probably a linter error that you get, and also you get the warning in the console. And the reason for this is because if you help React identify your list items, whenever React re-renders that list, it will not re-render the elements that are still present. So let's say you have a list of 5 items, and by any chance you delete one of them. Usually this happens in the parent component with triggering re-render of all the child, so all the list elements. And if you added that key and that key doesn't change, so it's not an index, React knows that it shouldn't re-render those parts, so it will make everything more efficient.
Now, going back to hooks, have you heard about the use memo hook? When would you use it? What's your experience using use memo?
Sure. Use memo is one of those performance hooks, and there is two of them: use callback and use memo. And use memo allows you to make every render faster when you have a certain value that it's expensive to compute. So to be honest and be pragmatic, there is so many use cases for our production for in typical web app. So for the sake of example, maybe imagine you have something very expensive doing within the component, like a for loop that goes to 100,000. You, if you use a memo, you will only compute that operation once. When you render the first time, then reuse that, like basically memorize that result and use it in subsequent re-renders if the dependency array doesn't change. So use memo actually comes with a dependency array, and if any of the dependency changes, then we need to recompute that method.
And why would you use memo?
You basically use it to make re-renders faster when you have any expensive value in the render method in functional components.
Now, moving on to something quite related, but not so much, we are going to talk about React context. And my question is, have you used it before? What would be the impact that it has over re-renders, talking about the rendering process in React?
Basically, context allows you to place a state at the top of the component tree and be able to access that state without doing prop drilling. So rather than passing that down through all the components, you can just kind of hook into it and using the use context hook API, and you eliminate prop drilling. The problem you might see in production is you wanna be very smart about how you split your state in context. If you have a state that totally unrelated in the same context, it means whenever any of that state property changes, every component connected to this context will re-render. So if you want to optimize for a few re-renders, it's very smart to split your state into different contexts. And so whenever that state changes, you won't have to re-render the whole component tree, only the ones that component actually find that state relevant. You don't want oversplit. You don't want to have like 15 provider layers with 15 different contexts. So you need to find a balance between too much splitting and having everything in one React context. And if you if you have everything in a single context, you will most likely have a lot of unnecessary re-renders.
And what kind of state would you put in React context? Right? We're talking about state. There is global state, there is form state, there is local state. There's all kind of states in a web application. Why do we have React? Why do we need React context in the first place? We talked about eliminating the prop drilling, but can we use React context for all of our state? What kind of state would you add to React context?
You probably want to add to React context the lightweight state that most of your component will need. Good example is authentication state. If you look at most of authentication libraries, they probably use React context under the hood, and translation state also built on top of React. So people changes language, and you want all the components to display like a different wording matching the language setting. So that kind of state is perfect for React context, and I wouldn't raise component or local state or form state to context. It's unnecessary most of the times. As a general rule, is to keep state as close to where it's being used, and it will avoid re-renders and make things easier to test. And when it comes to a state that has complex state transitions, like I work, for example, a lot of business application that involves a lot of charts that shows big data, uh, where you have complex settings. Maybe let's say accounting software, the user changes one setting, but you have the nested state object that you need to change. It's better in that case to use something like Redux and or more professional state machine implementation, which will allow you to very quickly have reducers and actions. You can have that in React context with use reducer if you combine them, but it's just better to use state machines. So React context is perfect for lightweight state that you want to distribute to your whole application, and you don't have too many complex state transitions.
One final question about the topic of class components and functional components, right? So what are some things you could do with class components that you cannot do with functional components?
That's a tough one because no one uses class components these days anymore. So I would say probably the biggest difference is in functional components. You cannot directly access lifecycle method. We do that through hooks, which offers us basically a simpler API to these methods. And one good example would be, for example, error boundaries. Whenever you have a React component, if you have a class component, you could use I think it's should component mount or unmount. I mean, like one of those lifecycle methods that will actually cache the error, and you can provide an error boundary rather than your whole UI breaking apart because of this component failed. You can't necessarily do that with functional components. So whenever you need an implementation that will hook into specific lifecycle methods, you should probably consider class components.
As for the people watching us, this is one video in many. We're making a series about the technical interview for senior JavaScript focused engineers. That means senior React interview, senior Node.js, senior frontend, senior backend. You will see more of those videos coming up. If you have any questions that you want us to answer here, just drop it in the comments. And also, if you're interested to join the free community that we've put together for software engineers, where you will get quality accountability and feedback, check out the link below in comments. And also, on top of that, if you want to figure out your skills, where you're at, we have a free technical assessment for you to find your gaps to senior level and beyond. We will see you in the next one.